grew up on a farm where a natural spring fed a pool. Sand fountains erupted from the bottom as the water sprang up from the earth. The water ran out into a little stream, draining into a creek, which flowed into a deep lake. The lake drained into a river, then into another river, and finally to the sea. As I wondered what source fed our spring, little fish came to make their home, and then one day were gone. In the passage of the seasons, fish would reappear. Although I didn't know it then, when I touched our pool, my hands held an unbroken connection to the sea. When we were young, my mother gave my brother and me snorkels and masks. I discovered a whole new world underwater. Later, after a day of farm work, I would cycle to the lake and with better snorkeling gear, dove farther out and deeper down. When I was 9, I saw the sea for the very first time, and at 16, I bought scuba diving gear. I began years of exploring and documenting underwater. The vitality of life in the sea impressed me with a sense of its beauty, fragility, and power. In the summer of 2012, I realized the need to make a film about this water world, how it sustains us, and our collective impacts upon it. This is that film. By the west coast of North America, between Vancouver Island and the mainland, lies the Salish Sea. This is the ancestral homeland of the original Indigenous peoples. I live here by the shores of this unique and beautiful place. Now, more than 7 million people live here. Yet hidden beneath the surface, a living treasure thrives on the ebb and flow of tides. Together, we will discover some of the thousands of species that make their home here. Complex life forms, evolving over eons, live intricately balanced life cycles in an ecosystem that we are only beginning to understand. Our ancestral home is the sea. Its life and forces sustain us, and its essence flows through our veins in a legacy shared by all living beings on the planet. What happens to the sea happens to us all. But some don't share this view. Billionaires Richard Kinder and Bill Morgan are partners in Texas-based Kinder Morgan, the largest operator of pipelines and terminals in North America. Kinder Morgan was cited for hundreds of violations, spills, evacuations, explosions, and fires, resulting in injuries, hospitalizations, and fatalities, and hundreds of millions of dollars in material damages. While the shareholders pocket the profit, people and communities and the environment carry the true cost of their operations. Since 1953, the Trans Mountain Pipeline carried petroleum products from Edmonton to Burnaby. When Kinder Morgan bought Trans Mountain in 2005, the first thing they did was aggressively expand offshore shipments of crude oil. Now they want to build a new pipeline from Edmonton to the west coast. Their shipments of diluted bitumen from the Alberta tar sands would triple, from 300,000 barrels a day to 890,000 barrels each day. Tanker traffic from their Burrard Inlet oil terminal through the Salish Sea would increase by 700% to more than 400 loaded tankers each year. But the increased oil tankers would actually be 1,800% over what it was in 2005 when Kinder Morgan took over the Trans Mountain Pipeline. The question isn't if a major oil spill happens, but when. Richard Kinder has said, "We just get paid a fee to move products and we don't care what gets moved down the highway." Meanwhile, the greenhouse gas emissions carbon footprint would be 150 million tons each year. Harm may come from a single catastrophic spill, dozens of lesser spills, or the time bomb of climate change. The CO2 dumped into the atmosphere from each fiscal quarter stays there for generations. Why is it even thinkable to jeopardize the well-being of your children and your children's children for the short-term profit of a few? And what is it about the Salish Sea that is so special that would be threatened by this inappropriate industrial development? Oceans are the great regulators of life on our planet. Energy and nutrients are distributed by complex currents, creating feedback loops between the ocean and the atmosphere. Our increasing numbers and activities release vast amounts of carbon, trapping heat, changing ocean chemistry, and altering the conditions upon which we and other species rely for our life cycles. We are creating the Anthropocene, our unwitting experiment of human-induced geological change. If we and other species survive this, what will future generations say about us?
Saving this planet is not a spectator sport. It does require your involvement, and so we need to each pick up the tools of science. And when you go and you put your money down on the counter, or you stick your Interact card into one of those little machines, you should know what it is you are purchasing. Why are the bees vanishing from this planet? Because people are making money at it. That's why. Why are we shattering the Earth's crust to get the last bit of gas out? Because people are making money at it. So it's very, very important to know that you actually are the only ones in control. You can feed the monster that is destroying our planet, or you can help us rebuild a world that we can pass on to our children. We need to learn how to work with the natural forces that made us, that made our planet, make everything we love on this planet. With every act, if we considered the next 7 generations, think about it. It would be pretty remarkable if everything you took, you made sure there was enough left, that it would be there for the ones that come after us.
It's a beautiful sea. It's a beautiful place, and it has been for a very long time. If we were to cast back perhaps 200 or 1,000 years, what we would see here is an ecologically intact society. A society that, in the various folkways and traditions, looked after the resources and their way of life. Perhaps we can learn a lesson from this. And perhaps it's time to also look forward and think of technology as a tool not just for making profitable ventures, sustaining life, for sustaining life abundantly, far, far into the future. We need to think more honestly and deeply about how we value this.
Everything is connected. The life cycles of salmon can teach us about some of those interconnections. Thousands of pink salmon have gathered on their migration to the spawning grounds. For millennia, salmon have returned year after year to rivers and streams around the Salish Sea. They return to the waters of their birth to spawn and die. This helps ensure the continuance of life in the surrounding ecosystems. Top predators, such as black bears, feed on the salmon for the essential food stores that will allow their survival through the winter. But bears aren't the only predators in these woods. Great blue herons are skillful hunters. This one sneaks up and carefully selects just the right size salmon before striking and seizing it in its powerful beak. Amazingly, it managed to swallow the entire salmon whole in a few well-managed gulps. The salmon parts that the bears leave behind help to feed the forest plants and trees. The decaying salmon replenish nutrients in the aquatic systems. These marine nutrients in the salmon are a gift to the forest from the sea. The forest gives back to the salmon, the rivers, and the sea. Together, they nurture each other. This circle of life has been called the Great Nutrient Cycle, from the sea to the forest and back again.
people always followed the salmon. They went from river to river wherever the salmon were running. And that's why our people were nomadic. They always knew when the salmon were coming. They always knew which river they were going to come to. What better way to share than with the entire community? To share not only our knowledge, but our way of life. And the way of life is returning back to our people in a natural way.
This is sometimes called the Emerald Sea, due to an abundance of phytoplankton, which gives these waters their green hue. Phytoplankton make up about half of global photosynthesis, taking up carbon and producing half of all oxygen in the atmosphere and oceans. Each year, about 10 trillion kilograms of carbon are fixated from the atmosphere into the ocean depths. This sea owes much of its high productivity to a source offshore. Winds and currents give rise to strong upwellings that bring up nutrients from the cooler depths. These nutrients are essential to sustaining high biological productivity. Tidal inflows and estuarine circulation funnel some of this bounty into the Salish Sea basin. Besides upwelling from the outer coast, the other major nutrient source is from the Fraser River, called Stolo, meaning river, in the First Nations language of the Stolo, or people of the river. The river deposits about 20 million tons of sediment into the sea annually. Smaller rivers like the Nanaimo River here and the Squamish and other rivers also contribute nutrients which fuel a major plankton bloom each spring and summer. Here at the surface, phytoplankton fed by these nutrients grow in the sunlit upper layers of the sea, reaching peak concentrations of millions of cells per liter of water, fueling one of the most productive marine ecosystems on the planet. Many zooplankton species graze on phytoplankton, while others prey on each other. This microscopic-sized planktonic life is the basis of the entire food web. Here, schools of forage fish feed on plankton and pass through on annual migrations. Along shorelines and estuaries grows eelgrass, prime habitat for many marine species. Eelgrass fixes CO2 by photosynthesis, forming a natural carbon sink in the bottom. Excessive dissolved carbon dioxide has already increased ocean acidity. On the BC coast, eelgrass sequesters more than 180,000 tons of carbon annually and also produces life-sustaining oxygen, which bubbles into the water. Yet eelgrass is not properly protected. Every year, herring return to spawning sites near the shore, where they require healthy beds of eelgrass, weeds, or kelp for the females to lay their eggs. The water's clarity is reduced to near zero as the males fertilize the egg masses with their milky sperm or milt. Sea lions, seals, and other predators take advantage of this abundant movable feast as herring congregate in massive schools. Even seen from a great distance, the waters turn opaque with herring milt in one of nature's epic reproductive cycles. Chief amongst the forage fish are these Pacific herring. This keystone species have a lifespan of up to 19 years. Unlike salmon, herring can return to spawn year after year if they can avoid their numerous predators. Each female, depending upon her age, can lay between 10,000 to over 20,000 eggs, but only one resultant adult will return to spawn from every 10,000 eggs. Except for schooling behavior and coloring, herring don't have any protection from predators other than their sheer numbers. Herring provide a vitally important link between the basic trophic level of plankton and the larger species of fish, birds, and mammals, including whales, like the humpback whales, which are now beginning to return to this sea in greater numbers. Though the spawning herring are eaten in large numbers, the tiny eggs themselves, measuring just 1 to 1.5 millimeters across, also provide a feast, and only about 1/4 of all those millions laid will survive long enough to hatch. Between 2 and 3 weeks after spawning, the herring larvae have grown to fill the egg case and begin movements to escape the confines of the tough protective case. The larvae are transparent except for their eyes. In this highly enlarged view, we can actually watch the heart beating inside the egg. One could say this is the beating heart of the Salish Sea. By vigorously flexing their tails, the larvae break a hole in the egg case and eventually struggle their way free. Now they begin their lives in open water. Measuring only 11 millimeters long, they are virtually invisible, blending in with the background. Millions of empty egg cases are all that are left visible underwater. Meanwhile, above, there is no sign of the drama that has been unfolding just below the surface of the sea. Over the next weeks and months, the almost invisible larvae will forage for plankton and grow rapidly to form active schools that are visible once more. Their prey drifts on currents in active masses of semi-transparent organisms, too small for the human eye to discern. Yet herring are able to detect and feed on these zooplankton copepods and amphipods, making these tiny grazers and hunters become the hunted. Copepods can detect the pressure wave of approaching fish and make rapid jumps to avoid their pursuers. But herring in a large school hunt information and are very efficient at catching their elusive prey. Forage fish and young salmon rely on these zooplankton to survive and thrive, since these tiny crustaceans constitute their main diet. When considering the survival of these species and those that are more familiar to us, we must remember that their fates are inextricably interwoven with our own.
The pH levels are changing drastically, and it's becoming more and more difficult to do my job. So we're seeing problems at the smallest stage in the hatcheries. The oysters just die. They won't form their shells if the pH isn't quite right. This year was the first year I've seen really dramatic signs of possible climate issues. So this spring, what happened was the oysters started to die as the weather got warmer, and we had a really warm summer. Now it's winter, and they're still dying. I've done this for 20 years, so this is the first sign of something's happening that's not right. The ocean just heated up, and typically when that happens, I can sink my stuff deeper. To keep my farm open, I have to have a certain temperature of water to make it safe for consumption to the public. So I drop all my product that's on the raft, hanging on the raft. I drop it 60 feet, and then the water is more like winter temperatures. But this year I couldn't do that in the summertime anyway, and because the whole ocean was so warm, people have invested a lot of money into boats and infrastructure and farm equipment, just like any other farm. But if there's no oyster seed to fill your farm, I mean, what are you going to do? Through some broodstock, maybe we can find a solution to an oyster that can live in different, different conditions. And if you breed them quickly enough, then they might be able to get accustomed to this changing climate.
Kinder Morgan will be responsible for 150 million tons of carbon if they build this new pipeline. If you add that to the fact that the Port Metro Vancouver wants to make this the biggest coal port expansion in North America, that's another 100 million tons of carbon. And then to add it up, you've got the British Columbia province, which says we're going to do liquefied natural gas. That's another 200 million tons of carbon. So we've only got 4 million people here. And if you do the math, you realize that we're sitting on 100 times more carbon per person, all of us, than anywhere else in the world. So if you care about climate change, if you decide to fight back on climate change, I hear 100 voices across the world.
We're a water planet, and why we are how we are and why we're so livable is that, in my view, we've been what you might call a triple point planet. We've had moisture, that is vapor, we've had liquid water, a large amount of it, and we've had ice. And when you've got all three together, they buffer systems. And if you were able to take one of those away, you would change completely the buffering. When I first went into the Arctic in 1974, it was very much an ice-covered ocean. We could not even get around most of the shelf that particular year in the Beaufort Sea. The last time I went up, in the last few years, the Beaufort Sea has been practically open in late fall. There's no ice on it at all. And what's happened over this time period is much of the multi-year ice, which is thick ice that stays around all your permanent, kind of a big flywheel in the system, has melted out, and it's replaced now with seasonal or first-year ice that melts out every year. So what that means is the Arctic has lost its ice capacity in a sense, its buffer. And people project that within the next 30 years we may end up with a seasonally ice-covered Arctic Ocean. That is, the whole ocean will be clear of ice at the end of summer. It'll be like Hudson Bay, which is very, very different from what the Arctic Ocean has been traditionally for as long as we've known it, and longer than that. We're talking hundreds of thousands to millions of years.
If we allow the Salish Sea to become a major fossil fuel corridor, we help fuel these global changes. Meanwhile, we are still in recovery from past industrial legacies.
Many years ago, back in the 70s, they had a chlor-alkali plant at the head of Howe Sound, and that works on a hooker process which used mercury, and they were releasing maybe as much as 20 kilograms a day of mercury into that water, and that wrote a record in the sediments.
A day?
A day. Massive amounts of mercury. You can see that mercury, and there was a mercury pulse that we can see. It's pretty pervasive. It's through Howe Sound, but we see it in the Strait of Georgia as well. And at that time, they had to close the fisheries because of the high mercuries. And then Howe Sound has received the benefit, if you like, of some other things. The Britannia mines have released copper and lead, especially, and zinc, and those can be seen in the sediments. They can actually be seen in the sediments all the way around the northern Strait of Georgia. So that they put their tailings straight into the ocean, and then they've had acid mine drainage, which we've tried to corral over the past number of years, still putting copper into the systems. Many of these nasty chemicals, like PCBs or polybrominated diphenyl ethers, stick to sediments, and so you can understand what's been going on by looking at those. So that's the basis of my knowledge. And as it turns out, orcas, the resident killer whales in the Strait of Georgia, are very high in their PCB loads. Why is that? Well, one of the reasons is because of the food web. And of course, they get this by this biomagnification that goes on everywhere. And so clearly there's a PCB cycle that's going on within our coastal waters, and it is getting through the food web, through biomagnification, to high levels in these long-lived animals that are very much fat dependent and use fat for their insulation. Mm-hmm. How long has this been going on? Well, some of these animals are old enough, let's say 90 years or so, that their birth predates the use of some of these chemicals. So what they've accumulated in themselves is over their lifetimes is kind of the use history of some of these. In the case of PCBs, we phased out using these in the early 1970s, but they're still cycling around, and they're going to continue to do so for decades. So the killer whales, especially males that have no easy way to divest themselves of these when they accumulate them, have got concentrations that in part reflect earlier free and loose usages.
That's actually an interesting point, because the females, would they divest to their offspring?
Exactly so.
So you have a newborn and it's already getting a load.
Absolutely,
yeah.
It is. Yeah. This is true of humans. It's because how do you, when you raise a small whale or a seal or whatever, the important thing again in the ocean here is fat. The milk that they give to their offspring is very fat rich. You want to grow your kid quick, and you want them to develop fat because they need insulation, they need energy reserves, and it's got to be quick. So they get this really rich milk. Well, where does PCB like to be? Where do other organochlorines like to be, like DDT or chlordane or any of those? They want to be in the fat. So the mothers have a way of offloading their contaminant burdens by producing milk and giving it to the offspring. And of course, if you want to look at what might happen in terms of changes, developmental changes, endocrine systems, that's a very sensitive age of growth, and you're giving them this dose.
Orcas use their sophisticated sonar for orientation and to locate prey. They are intelligent social beings that communicate with each other. Despite years of studying orcas, we still don't understand their language. In 2016, 10 southern resident orcas have died. In December, the body of a young male orca, known as J34, was located and towed onto this beach near Seychelles. The analysis of this necropsy showed that he had a healthy layer of blubber, but that he had died of blunt force trauma, possibly from being hit by a vessel. To us, a ship sounds like this. But sound travels faster in the higher density of water, so noise travels farther and louder, and is very disruptive to the sensitive hearing of marine mammals. We may never know the circumstances leading to the death of J34, but we know that he was alive when he was hit and that he could have lived for decades longer. Now there are only 78 southern resident orcas left. After reducing much of the pollutant output from industrial sites in Howe Sound, life is making an astonishing recovery here. Forage fish are returning in great numbers. Where they congregate, top predators follow. The presence of dolphins, sea lions, and numerous birds show the great power for recovery and resilience of nature. Most remarkable of all is the return of whales to their ancestral feeding grounds where they had formerly been for thousands of years. People have spent their entire lives here without ever seeing them, but are now watching these magnificent animals, spending entire summers here as they feed in the shallows. To observe these gentle giants in their natural habitat is a unique and unforgettable experience. It is said that nature cannot speak for herself. Therefore, we must speak for her. But nature does speak to us, using the powerful languages of beauty and science. If we take the time, we can hear the voice of nature speaking to us, as she has done here in the lessons to be learned from Howe Sound.
We are undermining the very things that keep us alive. The air, the water, the soil, and the other species that we depend on to live on this planet are all being degraded and undermined by human activity.
Water is the fundamental social medium on the planet. Water is the medium that connects us to other species, connects us to one another, and it's very profound in that way, in that it connects the unborn to generations of the past. I think of it as a language that all bodies speak. So every creature, whether it's a worm or a bacterium or a sequoia tree, all of our bodies are minutely receptive to water. It's this medium of interaction on the planet. So what happens when you then insert into that a system where you are constantly severing social relationships and extracting value from them is that the relationships that make water what it is are destroyed.
This land doesn't belong to me. It doesn't belong to any of us. It doesn't belong to any of you. We belong to this land.
I've grown up on this inlet all my life. My mother has grown up on this inlet all her life. My grandparents. We're not here today to say that we're against industry. Industry's been here all my life, all my mom's life. We've got the coal, the Shell tanks, Chevron, we've got hydro, we've got the railway, we've got the refinery, we've got chemical plants here. Enough is enough. In our inlet, no more. We've got so much at stake, so much at risk, that we just want to say, enough is enough, Kinder Morgan. I had the opportunity to be at the Healing Walk, ground zero of this Giga project. And where we were parked, as far as the eye could see, you could smell and see the pollution hitting the air. I could feel it in my lungs, I could feel it in my nose and my eyes. My eyes were burning, and that's what they live with there, and that it would be delivered right here across the water.
The northern boreal forest has become a sacrifice zone for the largest industrial site on the face of the planet. Extracting tar sands bitumen has degraded the Athabasca forest into a toxic wasteland. The region is a migratory pathway for millions of birds. But when birds land here, they die. Alberta now has the worst air quality in all of Canada. Heavy metals, aromatic hydrocarbons, and noxious gases contaminate the air, land, and water. More than 6 trillion liters of toxic wastewater cover vast areas, expanding by 250 million liters each day. More than 11 million liters of toxic processed tailings wastewater leach into the Athabasca River and the environment each and every day.
You know, right now, as I speak, our people are suffering. They're dying of cancer right now. In fact, they found a rare form of cancer in our town. They found 2 or 3 of them, and this cancer, I can't even pronounce the name of it. It's like 25 letters long. You know, and the ratio of this cancer, it happens in a population of approximately 100,000 people. 1 in 100,000 people get this kind of form of cancer in a year. Our town consists of 1,200 people, and we had two cases of this kind of cancer in 2 years. So when you start burying your friends and your family, you know, due to cancers and sicknesses that can't be explained by the federal government or by Health Canada or by anybody, you know something's wrong.
I walked through the tar sands in Alberta. You might as well have dropped a nuclear bomb there. It's so huge and everything around there is dying. We saw 4 birds and 1 bird was on the road and it was dead. And the people are sick. If we let this happen, that's going to happen to us. I'm a Tsleil-Waututh. We're the people of the inlet. Time for you to warrior up and stand for something. Stand for something. Stand up for our mothers. Stand up for this inlet. Stand up for the fish. They can't talk and say we don't want to be poisoned. The bears can't say it. It's up to us. We have to take it onto ourselves and say, no, we're not going to no bargaining table with Kinder Morgan. We're just flat out no.
We said that Indigenous peoples must be respected and be a part of the process. And we said that we would only approve projects that could be built and run safely. That's how we've come to today's decisions. First, the Government of Canada has approved the Kinder Morgan Trans Mountain Expansion Project.
No! That's not going to happen here.
If I thought this project was unsafe for the BC coast, I would reject it. This is a decision based on rigorous debate, on science, and on evidence.
On a calm, sunny afternoon on April 8, 2015, at 4:45 p.m., the Canadian Coast Guard monitored a boater's observation of a large oil slick on the water in English Bay, followed quickly by calls and reports of oil sighted from other concerned citizens. But it wasn't until 4 hours and 40 minutes later that a recovery vessel started skimming oil. Despite early reports of oil coming from one particular ship, the MV Marathasa, due to confusion and miscommunication, it took 12 hours and 40 minutes to place a containment boom around the ship. An unknown quantity of toxic, carcinogenic bunker fuel oil, amounting to several thousand liters, spilled from the MV Marathasa. The calm sea was an ideal situation for oil recovery, and light from the city allowed recovery crews to work through the night. Yet, the best subjective guess of the Coast Guard was that only 1,400 liters of the bunker oil was ever recovered. 2 years later, on April 5, 2017, the MV Marathasa, its operators, Alasia New Ships Management, and its owners failed to appear in BC Provincial Court to answer 10 charges related to the spill. To date, they have not paid any fines or damages. This tanker is registered as a flag of convenience in the Marshall Islands, a tiny, impoverished nation being submerged by sea level rise from climate change due to fossil fuel cargoes carried by such ships. Kinder Morgan's liability finishes here, at the end of their pipe. But an Aframax tanker like this can carry more than 80,000 metric tons of cargo. Spilling even a fraction would disperse millions of liters of toxic diluted bitumen into the environment. When something happens to the ship, it can disappear into a legalistic fog. On the West Coast, storms and strong currents are often the norm. If authorities cannot adequately deal with a minor spill occurring in perfect conditions, a few minutes from the dock, no amount of Prime Minister Trudeau's promises will cope with a major tanker accident occurring here, or here, or here. Increases in shipments of thermal coal, LNG, and diluted bitumen mean that the statistical probability of an accident occurring in Harrow Strait, for example, rises by 375%. As to rigorous debate, the National Energy Board hearings on Kinder Morgan's expansion project were closed to the public. Most people who applied to be interveners were denied. Interveners who were allowed to speak were not allowed to get at the truth by cross-examining evidence presented by Kinder Morgan. But Kinder Morgan's lawyers were allowed to cross-examine others. The National Energy Board accepted evidence presented by Kinder Morgan claiming that diluted bitumen would float, but refused to consider a critical piece of evidence. The U.S. National Academy of Sciences published a peer-reviewed paper. The study showed that bitumen can aggregate with silt particles and may sink in certain conditions. These conditions could apply to the surface waters of the Salish Sea, which have a high ratio of fresh water laden with silt from the Fraser and other rivers. With the action of rain, wind, waves, and currents, once the volatile diluents evaporate, the toxic bitumen could sink, making it unrecoverable. Before tankers can reach the bottleneck at the Harrow Strait, they must pass through the First Narrows, a restriction at Vancouver's Stanley Park, which forms the entrance to Burrard Inlet. The Narrows are a very busy pinch point and a place of strong currents. Together, these pose a significant hazard for ships. The safest bet is to pass through at high tide when the current is not running. During the passage of large vessels, there is no room for error. Vancouver is one of the busiest ports in North America. Navigating the congested inner harbor requires great care. The Second Narrows has the most hazardous navigational rating by the Canadian Coast Guard. Data from the Federal Transportation Safety Board show that from 1998 through 2008, there were 17 reportable marine incidents in the Second Narrows movement restricted area. The incidents included strikings, groundings, fires, collisions, near collisions, mechanical failures, engine failures, man overboard, broken tow lines, and death. In short, the usual run of things that can and do happen aboard vessels. In 1928, the SS Losmar destroyed a section of the Second Narrows Bridge. In 1930, the ship Pacific Gatherer collided with and severely damaged the bridge. In October 1979, the freighter MV Japan Erica collided with the bridge and knocked down a section of the span. An Aframax tanker can weigh up to 120,000 tons, or 600% more than that freighter. To pass through the Narrows without hitting the bottom, these tankers are restricted to carrying a load of 80% or less, since at best there will be only a few meters of clearance to the bottom, even at high tide. They must transit the Narrows at the highest high tide during the slack of the current, which may last only about 20 minutes. The narrow clearance between the bridge piers and the restrictions of the shallow channel bottom mean that the passage must not only be timed exactly, but that the tanker and the tugs tethered to it must at all times be precisely in the correct position. For the crews on the tanker and on the tugs, this is deadly serious and requires the highest level of skill, training, and concentration. Threading these huge tankers through the needle of the Narrows is a precision maneuver where there is absolutely zero tolerance for any error, mechanical failure, outside interference, or disturbance, whether from nature or man. A malfunction of any kind could lead to a grounding or a collision with the CN Rail Bridge or the Ironworkers Memorial Bridge, or both, resulting in disastrous consequences for both the environment and the public. These tankers passing through the Second Narrows are an accident just waiting to happen. Kinder Morgan wants to increase its oil storage on Burnaby Mountain by 330% to over 5.5 million barrels. The existing tanks are not engineered to withstand a severe earthquake. A cascading event could unleash one tank fire onto the next. Kinder Morgan wants the Burnaby Fire Department to respond to fires or explosions, but the fire department does not have this capability. Residential areas and schools are just below the site, and Simon Fraser University is right above. A boil-over fire could discharge molten oil to a height of 1 kilometer and a width of 3/4 of a kilometer, engulfing residents and blocking the single escape route out of the university. Noxious gases and carcinogens could spread more than 5 kilometers, with toxic smoke clouds covering areas farther than 40 kilometers away.
Well, nowhere in the organized world, let's put it this way, in this day and age, would a tank farm be allowed on the side of a mountain above a residential area. And to be expanding it threefold is absolutely, totally irresponsible.
Hoping that when there's change, it'll turn out well.
What we didn't see coming up behind us was the corporate culture. The idea that multinational corporations could become bigger than countries and more powerful than countries. That they were able to lobby in a way that no citizen could. That they had full-time employees who were sitting in places like Ottawa, talking in the ear of the politicians to convince them to do what they wanted. And pretty soon those politicians, far away from us, began to believe what they were told. They began to believe that their interests coincided with the interests of the multinational corporations. Tell you just a little story about what happened in this pipeline. Is that prior to this all beginning, is that Kinder Morgan went to the National Energy Board and said, we need to get additional money in order to do this application. They went before the National Energy Board, and the National Energy Board awarded them $135 million as a surcharge on oil to be paid by consumers and non-taxable for them to build a war chest in order to be able to implement this application. As a city, we're looking at our own funds to be able to fight back against an application that is overwhelming. So how do you expect the board is going to rule when they've already made a $135 million investment in seeing this project go through? When you think about the potential catastrophe that could occur as a result of one of those tankers being damaged in our inlet, the destruction that would cause to the reputation of this city, the destruction that it would cause to the people that surround that inlet, the destruction it would cause to the wildlife because of one accident and one tanker. And we've just increased those odds by 7 times as a result of this project.
On November 21st, 2014, Kinder Morgan began drilling for seismic surveys for the proposed new oil pipeline through a park and conservation area owned by the City of Burnaby on Burnaby Mountain.
This is a park and a conservation area, and never in the history of Canada has the federal government overruled the bylaw making authority of local governments with respect to the trespass issue and coming into this park and cutting down trees without the approval of the Burnaby people and their mayor and council.
Following Kinder Morgan's unauthorized tree cutting in the conservation area, a grassroots community of caretakers gathered to protect the park.
I wrote an op-ed that was published, and in that op-ed I commented that when I came and sat vigil on this site, that I felt a sense of growing community with these people that I had never met before, people from all walks of life. We were drawn together in our concern for this pipeline. I stated that I would be willing to do civil disobedience if it came to that, which it hasn't come to that yet. for those two things were cited in court to demonstrate what a bad apple I am.
Everyone named in this suit really has been doing what they felt they could do and should do as someone concerned about protecting this mountain. And they've not broken any laws, and no one's being told you've broken a law. We're being told you're inconveniencing us, and therefore we're going to sue you for lots of money.
If I would not do those things again, I would be giving up my freedom of speech. And I'm not going to let Kinder Morgan take away my freedom of speech in this country.
I'm about to read to you
The injunction requires demarcation lines. Kinder Morgan is
the
responsible
reasons
for putting
if you do not leave this area, which is basically where this camp is, if you do not depart this area and move to this side of the road, you will be arrested.
I mean, it's a legal requirement that there should be demarcation lines. That was specified in the injunction. I don't see any of those lines. So why aren't they here? I mean, you're asking people to leave an area, but it's not very specific. Do you have an answer for me?
You are under arrest for civil contempt of court and injunction pronounced by the British Columbia Supreme Court on Friday, November 14th, 2014.
And the police are cordoning off an area much greater than what we are required to leave.
Stop Kinder Morgan! Stop Kinder Morgan! Stop Kinder Morgan! Stop Kinder Morgan!
We asked over and over again for where the lines were. We never got a clear answer.
So what are you guys, tactical unit or something?
Yeah.
Do you see peaceful protesters as that much of a threat?
Shouldn't even be here. For a Texas-based oil company, are you thinking about what the fuck you're doing right now? Who the fuck are you serving? Seriously.
Who are you protecting?
At the end of the day, you're protecting Kinder Morgan, and you know what? You're gonna lose. You're never building that pipeline. What the fuck did you sign up to do? You're on the wrong side of history. Wrong side of history.
Off the road, you're going to jail.
Don't hit my camera.
Out of the way.
I'm not going to tell you again.
In our lifetimes, species are becoming extinct at an increasing rate. It is important to know and understand this natural world. What we know, we may treasure and protect. Without respect for life, what we don't know could be lost forever. Engaging with wild places may transform familiar experience into the extraordinary. Crossing boundaries and exploring the unknown can deepen our understanding of the world as we reconnect with ourselves. After many years of diving, I still find each dive a unique experience. We find this octopus in its den in the rocks. The litter of crab shells shows some of its favorite food. Octopuses can be very shy. When I focus on one thing, like this rockfish, I may not see something else. In the background, deep inside the crack in the rock, is an octopus. By adjusting tiny pigment sacs in their skin cells, they can change colors. Using dermal muscles, they can also change their skin texture to blend into the background. The giant Pacific octopus is the largest on the planet, growing up to 4 or 5 meters across. Some have grown even larger. They are usually nocturnal hunters and can taste by touch. They have 3 hearts and copper-based blood, which carries less oxygen than our iron-based blood. With climate changes, increasing water temperatures, and lower oxygen levels, they may be at risk. Octopuses have been in the fossil record for 300 million years. These intelligent animals have very short lifespans of only 3 to 5 years. Rockfish grow very old, often much longer than humans. Rock formations in deeper water are their favorite habitat. This inquisitive quillback rockfish patrols its chosen territorial home on its rocky reef. It may live here for up to 95 years. Nearby is a goldeneye rockfish, one of the longest-lived species of fish in the world, with a lifespan of 120 years or longer. As a juvenile, it looks completely different. It will take 20 years to reach sexual maturity. There are 38 different species of rockfish here, but due to human predation and habitat destruction, they are in severe decline, with only a tiny fraction of their former abundance. poachers who disregard rockfish conservation areas can wipe out all the old productive breeding fish on a reef. Even with strict conservation measures, it may take 100 years to rebuild their numbers. This tiger rockfish can reach a great age. One individual lived to 160 years old. Wolf eels are reclusive and make their homes inside rocky dens. When they reach maturity, they typically mate for life. The pair will maintain their homes inside a den for many years. This is the male. The female is out of sight, hidden inside the den. Some of the wolf eel's favorite food are giant red sea urchins, which grow up to 30 centimeters across. Sea stars come in all colors, shapes, and sizes, like this rainbow sea star or this striped sun star. The sunflower star can measure up to 1 meter across and is the fastest moving of these predators. It will consume almost anything in its path, especially sea urchins. Shortly after this scene was recorded, sea star wasting disease struck, resulting in a mass die-off. Research indicates this to be related to denzovirus and also an association with warmer water. This event is still not fully understood and research continues. The absence of sea stars as a top predator, for example, will have consequences for local environments all along the coast. These green sea urchins eat kelp. Following the sea star's depopulation from wasting disease, the numbers of sea urchins exploded. Abundant kelp beds help provide important habitat for many other species. Once, the bottom here would have been covered in kelp. This is what an out-of-balanced ecosystem looks like. For the time being, other species, like this Dungeness crab, carry on the cycles of life and daily foraging for food. Its cousin species, a red rock crab, has found a shellfish meal amidst a bed of kelp and weeds. At first impression, this might be algae. A closer look reveals translucent squid eggs, waiting to hatch out of the enclosing sacs. Giant plumose anemones may colonize current-swept areas. These productive waters allow for giants of several species. The cabezon is the largest member of the sculpin family, reaching a length of up to 1 meter. At maturity, it chooses a home on rocky reefs. Here, it hunts crabs and mollusks. Lingcod can reach up to 1.5 meters in length. To see such a large, mature fish is rare, since they have been decimated by overfishing. Giant acorn barnacles grow up to 6 inches across. They sweep their appendages to feed on plankton carried by waves and currents. These are amongst the largest barnacles in the world. They live from the intertidal zone down to 90 meters. Their smaller cousins grow in vast colonies all along the shorelines. In the shallows, waves stir oxygen into the water, and abundant plankton provide plentiful food for these filter-feeding mussels. Hundreds of juvenile Dungeness crabs have arrived en masse at a nearby reef, attracted by these banquets of mussel beds. Schools of perch patrol overhead on the lookout for any choice scraps of mussels left over from the crabs feeding below. This is a rare sight, as it is more usual to spot a few lone crabs on the adjoining sand and mud bottom. The young crabs hold feisty competitions for choice locations to pull apart mussels with their powerful claws and feed on the soft tissues. Proportionately, most of their growth rate is at this juvenile stage, with many successive moltings, when they shed their hard shells. At each molting, they can put on as much as 40% growth while in their soft stage. Deeper on the reef, usually below 25 meters, we may find glass boot sponges. They pump water through their cellular wall structure while feeding on bacteria, algae, and small organic particles. These sponges can grow to 1.5 meters in length, and a large animal like this can be well over 200 years old. Each sponge can provide critical habitat to many other species. Juvenile rockfish find protection in the openings, and feather stars often fasten themselves here as they comb the water, feeding on plankton. This delicate glass sponge habitat is also a favorite refuge for squat lobsters. These sponges are primitive animals that were alive in the time of dinosaurs. They don't have a brain or nerve network, yet they can transmit electrical signals to control water flow, which regulates for sediment particulates. Most of their structure is composed of a complex silica matrix, which can easily be damaged by fishing gear. Glass sponges require locations with a high dissolved silica content in the water and grow very slowly. During the time of the dinosaurs, glass sponge colonies built enormous reefs, stretching for thousands of kilometers, creating the largest known living reef structures on the planet. Paleobiologists like Dr. Manfred Krauter studied the fossil records and believed that these reefs had died out.
About 40 million years ago, more or less, the sponge reefs died out. We cannot find any younger ones. Nowhere on Earth. So we paleontologists, we thought, okay, if you don't find them anymore, they're gone, they're extinct.
Then, in 1987, Canadian scientists found living glass sponge reefs off of Canada's west coast in Hecate Strait, near Haida Gwaii. Later discoveries revealed reefs living in the Salish Sea also. Most are too deep for divers to visit, except in Howe Sound, where citizen scientists and divers are engaged in ongoing research and discovery to help protect these rare ancient animals. The reefs are more than 9,000 years old and inhabit a narrow ecological niche that is very sensitive to changes. These delicate glass sponges serve as prime nurseries for endangered juvenile rockfish and other species, but can easily be destroyed by fishing gear and bottom trawls. Although some reefs have been assigned as protected areas, many have not. These living treasures are not known to exist anywhere else on the planet. Sunlight, nutrients, oxygen, plankton, all these sustain a highly productive sea. Waves and currents circulate and recharge these vital elements and energy that maintain the abundance and biodiversity of this rich ecosystem. So much of the life of this productive sea is hidden, and so much more still remains to be understood. This sea is resilient and capable of astonishing recovery. She is a powerful entity that sustains herself in beauty and abundance, but since we are a part of her, she requires our utmost respect so that we may live in balance with her on this living earth. I wonder, will people care enough to conserve all this?
Change, we all need a little. Time, we could use a little. Cry, you make me wanna. Change, could you spare a little? I don't wanna lose. I don't wanna choose. I don't wanna lose you. Try, we deserve another. Cry, you make me wanna. Silence the sound, blue air to ground. What's free is bound. Try, we all deserve another. I don't wanna lose. I don't wanna choose. I don't wanna lose you. I don't wanna lose you. Dreams, you come to me in dreams. Dream, can we dream a little?